It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Love being back at MGH. It's an amazing place. Mass Eye Near as well, right next door. Just we're so blessed to be working across the Charles River with each other. So I have a lot to cover, and it's hard to follow Lonnie. Lonnie really focused on the human, right? The human is at the center, the human physiology, the human health, the pressure in the brain. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the systems, the complex systems that surround and support the human. Obviously, they have to work hand in hand. So our lab is the ESL, the Engineering Systems Lab. And a couple of months ago, I experimented with generative AI, and I put the different stuff we're working on in the lab. And this is what it came up with. It's very confusing. A lot of people are very confused about what we do in the ESL. So I'm going to keep it simple for now. And this is our logo for the ESL, and you can read different things into it, but the most common interpretation is Earth, Moon, Mars, and beyond. So we're going to start on Earth, give you an example of a project. The human is kind of there, but indirectly. So we did a project about water pollution and how to prevent water pollution. This is the famous Itaipu Dam in Brazil. And one of the big issues they're facing in Brazil is there's a lot of agriculture, animal-based agriculture in the south of Brazil. The waste that the runoff that comes from this agriculture goes into the river, like the Piranha River, and the Itaipu Dam, and messes up the turbines. That's a big issue. So how could we get around that? Well, one is to, instead of having the runoff go into the water, is to close loops. So animal waste collection networks, biodigesters, creating biofertilizer, putting that back into crop and fodder production, and closing the loop that you see on the left there. And on the right side, well, what do? You can create biomethane, which you can use for the power grid, electricity production. You can use it for fuel. You can use it for stove cooking, a lot of potential uses. And then the question is, can such a system be not just physically feasible, but financially sustainable as well, and decarbonize the environment? So this was a project we did with JWAFs at MIT. I'm not going to go through the details, but you can optimize those flows, the flows of CO2, biomethane, and also the financial flows. And it turns out that the answer, when you apply it to real geographies, is yes, in some counties, in some areas, you can make it work. It can be self-sustaining. And in those areas that are more rural, the farms are smaller, it's much harder. So we have to think about these flows in a really systematic way. So let's go from the Earth to the Moon. Big effort, big ambitions we have. Part of the Artemis program is to get humans back to the Moon. We had a great visit last week of David Lim, who's the CEO of Blue Origin. You can see the Mark II, an example here of the Mark II lander. And the question is, how do we return to the Moon, not just for 3 days with 2 astronauts, but to stay longer? This is a logistical problem. Space logistics is an issue that we've looked at for 20 years, really, in our lab. And so one way to model that is using discrete event simulation. So the landing that you just saw is an event, rendezvous and docking, transferring crew from one vehicle to another, resupplying is also an event. And so if you think about it as a supply chain in space with nodes, objects, a time-expanded network, and events, we can actually simulate not just a single mission, but campaigns of missions and future infrastructure. So that's something called SpaceNet. And I will say one specialty of ours is to not just think about mass cargo in a generic sense, but to really dig in the details of propellants, crew provisions, crew operations, waste as well. A lot of people don't like to think about waste and waste management, but it's very important. So with this approach, very general approach, we can take a look at ISS resupply, which we've been doing for over 20 years. We can look at future Mars campaigns with or without robotic precursors. The lower left, the lunar outpost, this is very close to Artemis. And then my personal favorite, which you will find in no official NASA document, no DRM, is the Nomadic scenario. And that's where you land on one of the poles of the moon. You bring everything with you, a caravan style, including an ascent vehicle. Once you hit your radiation maximum, you leave with your ascent stage. The next crew arrives where the prior crew left off, and you do this stage by stage until you reach the other pole. Very exciting, very challenging. And it's challenging because when we look at these space exploration campaigns, these are all human campaigns, not just purely robotic ones. There's a lot of complexity. Nodes, edges, missions. Look at the events. The Mars exploration campaign has 337 mission events that have to happen successfully. And the durations involved here, anywhere from 6 months, that's 148 days, all the way up to 7,000, these are Earth days. You know, once you start doing interplanetary supply chain, you have to think, are we talking about sols on Mars? Are we talking about Earth days? Are we talking about lunar days? Even your time reference becomes challenging. I will just say that we haven't done a lot of work on this, but the space medical logistics become important. So here's a framework that we published about a decade ago on how much mass do you plan for the human health aspect. So this is, for example, Professor Peterson was talking about the X-rays in space, the supplies. It's essentially, it scales with the number of crew, the duration, the distance from Earth, and we can estimate these things fairly rigorously at this point. So then we want to go to Mars, not just the moon, but we want to go to Mars. And if you look at this animation, of course, the big challenge with Mars is that you can't launch whenever you want. We have those 26-month launch windows. By the way, the one that's highlighted with the black dot, that was the July 2020 launch window, that was actually used by 3 robotic missions, right? So the US used it with Perseverance, the UAE had a mission, the HOPE mission, and then China also launched. So these Mars launch opportunities are getting more crowded. So every 26 months, and so if we do the quick math of what is the need of humans, keeping humans alive for that duration, you can see on the input side, we need about 11 pounds per day. That includes oxygen, water, food, and of course, it has to be a balance. And to really understand the infrastructure that's needed to keep humans alive, we developed something called HabNet. And we conducted a number of case studies with it. One is Mars One. You might have remembered this about 8-10 years ago. Mars One was a nonprofit that claimed to do planning one-way missions to Mars. It turns out that when we really analyzed it and modeled it in detail, their claims were absolutely unrealistic by about a factor of 3 or 4. An interesting thing you learn very quickly is do not actually combine the greenhouse and the humans. The crew quarters and the greenhouse should be separate because the humans like to be a dry climate, a little bit cooler, low CO2. Plants like the opposite. Plants like to be warm, high humidity, and high CO2 content. 55% is sort of the ideal humidity for most plants. And then you can go a little bit smaller, so Martian outposts. This is an example of what a smaller kind of habitat for a smaller crew might look like. One thing we need to spend a lot of more time than we have is failure modes. So as we analyze environmental control and life support systems, what are all the different failure conditions? And I had a PhD student who really worked on HabNet as his main topic. And he would come in the morning and say, I killed 12 astronauts today, but don't worry, only in simulation. So what are the things that can kill astronauts in space? It's a long list. And so these 6 conditions are the ones that HabNet can capture. Starvation, that's pretty obvious, not enough calories. Dehydration, hypoxia, hyperoxia as well, which is also a fire hazard. Crew CO2 poisoning, and then cabin under pressure. And this is only a very small set of all the failure conditions. And then the question is, which one of these are the most time critical if you don't have time to repair the system? And CO2 poisoning, of the ones that I showed you, is the one that within hours you have to act for CO2 poisoning. And so you either exceed critical thresholds or you go under them, such as in the upper right, this is the partial O2 pressure dropping below the hypoxic threshold. Those things we can simulate, we have data, we can validate it against ISS, and it's an area of great interest, environmental control and life support. Long term, we want to go to Mars. Maybe we'll build tunnel networks, right, in a crater rim. And if you look at the different colors of these tunnels, the green ones, of course, are the ones where, you know, we're going to grow the food and the plants. And that in itself is a complex system. So that greenhouse that you saw, that's in the lower right corner. The fancy word for that is a BPS, a biomass production system. A great question is, how do we mix together physical-chemical technologies and biology in an ideally synergistic way? A lot of research to be done. And then in orange, how do we use local resources, either from the atmosphere or from the soil? And from the atmosphere, this links to MOXIE. And Jeff Hoffman is here, our colleague, who is co-PI for the MOXIE experiment, which has been conducted successfully on the Mars 2020 mission, which if we scale up MOXIE, and there's a good understanding now, we should be able to produce enough oxygen for breathing, but also for as an oxidizer for the ascent vehicle. How much oxygen have we produced on Mars so far? Well, think about roughly the amount of oxygen that one single mature tree would produce. So hopefully you're less confused than at the beginning, how all these things fit together, the local resources, the habitation technologies, and the logistics. They all have to work hand in hand, because ultimately our goal is this. If you think about the population or crew size on the x-axis, so this is logarithmic. So a spacesuit is a spacecraft, right? That's one astronaut, one human, 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. And then the y-axis is what we call endurance. It's our maximum time between resupply. Everything in blue are space habitats that we've either flown or we've proven that we can do it. So the early crewed vehicles, the early space stations, and then this line here is kind of the trade-off between endurance and crew size in space. And in green, we have terrestrial habitats like the Biosphere 2, the Aquarius Underwater Lab, which unfortunately did shut down, the South Pole Station, and then a submarine like the USS Parche, which is one of the long-range submarines. The reason we can extend this frontier on Earth is because we have access to water. That's basically the big difference. Eventually, we want to be in that upper right corner, a self-sustained presence. For example, the Stanford Torus, you've heard about this concept, a future Mars settlement. And so the really exciting area for research is beyond that frontier, but not quite yet at that utopian point. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for the invitation.